The 2026 general election has passed, and Prime Minister Robert Abela has appointed his new cabinet. We have with us today the CEO of the Malta Chamber of Commerce, Enterprise and Industry, Dr. Marthese Portelli, who is here to talk to us about the pledges which were made, proposals, and also issues which the country and the business community are facing. Dr. Portelli, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
First of all, in your opinion, what should be the first item on the government's agenda?
So in our lead document, which was the document that we presented to both political parties in the run-up to the election, we emphasized on two main points, which are productivity and quality. So as a country, as a nation, as a state, we need to bear those two ideas in mind in every single policy that is going to be formulated, in every single incentive that is going to be rolled out, and even in every piece of legislation that is going to be brought up at Parliament. And why am I mentioning productivity and quality? If you look at statistics, whilst our GDP and GVA continue to increase and improve year on year, very little of that is attributed to productivity. It is primarily attributed to the labor force. As a country, given our size, we need to ensure, even in order to keep abreast with all other European countries, we need to improve on our productivity. Now, if we enhance our productivity, it will automatically also mean that we have improved on our competitiveness. And in order to improve on our productivity, we also need to take into consideration quality, because ultimately quality also brings excellence with it.
You're mentioning the need to improve productivity. What perhaps ideas do you have which could bring about such a change or bring about such improvement?
Okay, so productivity cannot be seen in isolation, and this is one of the pitfalls, I would say, that sometimes people who are in the driving seat of policy making fall. Why? It is relatively easy to come out with incentives in a separate way. However, in order to ensure that you tackle productivity, it needs to be looked at holistically. So if you look at our document, we have incentives and ideas on how businesses can improve their productivity by taking up digitalization faster than it is actually being taken now. For example, one of our proposals actually ties in as a KPI that you get refunded, you get incentives based on the difference in productivity that you have registered over a specified period of time. Another proposal is also linked to the take-up by the employees of any digitalization solutions. And why am I saying this? Because there needs to be a complete change of mind frame. There needs to be a complete change of culture, not only within businesses or within the mindset of the business owner, but also within that of the employee. So the business owner needs to understand the potential of technology, of today's technology. The team needs to evaluate and appreciate the value that proper implementation of digitalization can have on a business per se, and employees need to embrace as well the change and the investment being done by that company. So really and truly, it's a transition that will require multiple players. Nobody can do it on its own. Now, in parallel, for example, to digitalization, we have also listed a number of ideas of how to improve on our labor force. So apart from specific training, upskilling, and reskilling, we have also included a number of proposals how, when importing labor, we can import the better employees, particularly in terms of specialized skills. Then there are other elements which will also impact on productivity, like, for example, the ease of moving around. Traffic has an impact on productivity as well, both traffic on land and even the facility of exporting your products or importing any raw materials that one might require. So really and truly, it is a whole ecosystem that one must look at and make sure that everybody understands that he, she, or whoever has a role to play. It's not government's sole role to improve productivity. It is not the business's sole role to improve productivity. It is not the employee's sole role to improve productivity, but all three must work together to achieve the targets that we would like to reach as a country.
You've actually touched on a number of points which I wanted to talk about, but before moving on to that, I'd like to ask you a question about AI and its use in improving productivity. Do you think Maltese, obviously the government introduced a scheme recently or an agreement recently which would help bring about the better use and training of AI in Malta a couple of weeks ago, basically. But do you think the use of AI by companies, by businesses, do you think it's reaching a level where it could actually make a change and make an impact in terms of improving productivity? Or is there still a lot more which could and should be done?
I think that as a country, the first thing that we need to do is understand exactly what AI is about. There are misconceptions of what is AI. There is also lack of knowledge of what AI can do. So every little bit helps, every type of support helps, but I believe that as a country we need to start explaining what exactly is AI. What is different between AI and Internet of Things? What is different between AI and analysis of a particular database? And on top of that, we need to also show the power of AI. What can you do with that? On top of that, we also need to show and basically to showcase that AI can help you do things in a better way and in a faster way. And that will help to increase productivity. In fact, as a Chamber of Commerce, we have a series of training sessions and information sessions which we are rolling out to our members. Incidentally, we have a session going on whilst we're doing this interview where we are partnering up with our Maltese experts and even international experts, literally getting them in touch with other entities to show them what AI is all about, what exists, and how it can be adapted to their day-to-day processes. But one of the things that companies need to embrace as well is the importance of doing a business re-engineering process, which is usually the most tedious and the most difficult thing to do because you might find resistance. But it is very useful to every now and then look at your current processes, see where you can improve, adapt to today's technology, and literally rehash where you need to rehash.
Now, obviously, we've mentioned AI, digitalization, and other ways to improve productivity. And you yourself mentioned that perhaps the economy has been too much based on labor as well, on the labor force. But to bring about that change, to perhaps reduce reliance on the labor force, what is the first step that can be taken? What's the starting point here?
I'll also go back one step. There was a time where we needed to increase our labor force. However, as a country, we made a very strategic mistake in that we didn't take into consideration how big the influx of labor of the labor market would be and the impact that it would have on the infrastructure. So that is something where I believe that as a country we could have tackled much better. On the other hand, how do you start reducing this labor dependency? It all comes by change from within. And I believe that this is something that both the private sector and even the public sector need to embrace. We need to learn how to do more with less. And if we really learn how to do that properly, everybody will be in a better place. Employees will be in a better place, the employer as well, people operating in the public sector as well. It's the biggest challenge to get a change in mindset and to get people who have been operating for X number of years to change what they have done successfully or even less successfully to adopt to new methods, even because there would be the fear of the unknown. However, this is why we as a chamber are taking a proactive role, even to show businesses that there are people who are there willing to help you and guide you even if you have any questions, any difficulties, etc.
Obviously, this growth, rapid growth in population has resulted in certain pressures being placed on Malta. I'm going to mention the rampant construction, the traffic and transport, but to a certain extent, even on the size of apartments, which we're seeing built now, for example, or the way Malta skyline has changed as well. If we keep going in this direction, do you think Malta could be at risk of losing its identity?
Yes, we've been repeating this year on year in our pre-budget documents, in our pre-electoral programs. We need to protect our identity in that it is what makes us Maltese. It is what makes Malta. So that is one of the elements that we really need to take care of. And why? Because it is an attraction in itself. Now, if you look at our proposals, we have a number of ideas, even, for example, on how the construction sector can operate in a much better way. So if we were to start with the short-term rentals, as a chamber in the past months, we put forward a number of proposals how short-term rentals need to be regulated better, even in terms of waste management, etc. We also pushed to have a distinction between apartments that will be let on a short-term basis and those on a long term.
In fact, there were some changes which the government
yes,
brought in
and
recently as
most
well.
of the changes were based on what we had proposed. However, tied to that, we must also ensure that there is strict and proper enforcement. Because in reality, we do have a number of good laws in Malta. However, enforcement is a bit lax. And you can have a very good law, but if it remains on paper or if it's not properly enforced, it tantamounts to not having a law at all. On the construction side, if you look at our proposals, we have a number of incentives which incentivize and push towards a higher quality. So apart from the fact that we have repeatedly, year on year, pushed to have the SPED revised along, rather than through a piecemeal approach, it needs to be revised in its totality. One needs to look at all the policies that currently form part of the SPED, identify which are conflicting with one another, remove any conflicts, to basically have clarity as to what can be developed where, rather than the current approach of choose and pick the policy that suits you best. So in our mind, that is one of the things that needs to happen. We need to revise SPED, and in conjunction, we need to have an aesthetics policy and a landscape policy. These three go hand in hand. If we have that, we will be protecting the fabric of our island, that which makes us unique. On top of that, we also have a number of other proposals. For example, as you know, basically the construction sector, particularly when it's on the development side, people involved in the industry pay the least tax in the sense that whereas corporate tax stands at 35%, if, for example, you're leasing out property, that's taxed at 15%, even when you're speaking about the global tax that is paid. So what we are trying to push for is, let's reward companies, people in businesses who are doing their business in a way which benefits the island. In the construction sector, for example, we would like to see lower taxes only in the instances where the developer, the contractor, the lessor are operating, developing, constructing projects, residences, etc., where their environmental sustainability goes above the minimum that is allowed at law. So our reasoning is we shouldn't be rewarding anybody who sticks to the law, but we should be incentivizing and rewarding those who are going further than what is required in the general interest of the country. So that is possibly one area of looking at it. We also have other incentives tied to the preservation of our stone. As you know, Maltese stone is decreasing. We have properties both within the UCA, which is protected, but also outside the UCA. Outside the UCA, it is much easier to demolish. And we have incentives which basically favor those who protect buildings which are outside the UCA, which are built in Maltese stone. Like that, we will also be preserving, again, something that makes us Maltese.
There's been a push this past election and even a bit before by the government and even by the opposition to focus more on quality of life rather than increasing GDP, or rather, like in conjunction, in addition to increasing GDP. But do you think over the past years, perhaps it was a bit of an unbalanced situation? Because we're focusing on quality of life now, the need for improvements now, but
Yes, I mean, in 2021, as a chamber, we issued our first document where we specifically focused on a well-being economy, where we said that we need to move away from measuring success based purely on GDP and base it on the well-being of the individual and our wellness as a country in its totality. Yes, we need to go down that route. It is not an easy challenge, particularly given that quality was not given the attention that it merited over the last years. However, I believe that this is an area where, as a country, we need to cooperate together. We've raised this even within the MCSD meeting that we had earlier this week with the Office of the Prime Minister. The country needs to focus on quality. We cannot continue literally basing our success on the quantity, even because the quantities have brought with them a number of challenges. So if we look at the water issues, sewage issues, we had electricity issues. If you look at even the built environment, traffic, these all stem from the fact because as a country we were focused more on quantity. And if we were to look at it, both from the labor migration point of view, but even from the tourism point of view, I believe that the fact that the country's economy was based more on quantity than over quality has put a lot of unnecessary strain on the island, which ultimately has also resulted in not improving our productivity. Now, again, is it easy to change from night to day and from day one you go from quantity to quality? No, it is not easy. But if there is the willpower, it can be done. As a chamber, we have a number of proposals. In fact, when it comes to tourism, earlier this year, we published our own document, which is literally focused on what the country needs to do to basically attract and give more quality experiences to our tourists. So in the beginning, you were mentioning Malta's identity. It is something that the tourist actually looks for. So, and it goes beyond our sun and sea. We've got a lot of culture, we've got a lot of history, and that is what distinguishes us from all the other Mediterranean islands who can equally offer sand and sea. So this is why we need to look at quality. And in terms of tourism, when we speak about quality, we are not speaking about luxury. This is a term that usually tends to get confused. Luxury speaks for itself, what it is all about. But what we are after as a chamber is quality experiences. So whether you are a 4-star tourist, a 5-star, a 3-star tourist, we want to offer you the best experience in Malta. And that requires a mindset change across the board. For example, we have quite good hotels in Malta and quite well-kept hotels in terms of aesthetic, in terms of their internal infrastructure, etc. But in order to offer a proper quality experience, we need to ensure that the route from the airport to their hotel is seamless. We need to ensure that the minute they step out of their hotel, the ambience around is equally of a high quality. So there are certain basics which we need to start looking at as well. For example, the pavements, ensuring that they are all leveled, even a certain level of cleanliness, even a better improved degree of maintenance across the board, whether it is literally the benches, whether it is the greenery and the flowers that we have in our roundabout. So ultimately, it's a package that we need to take care of across the board.
Another focus has also been on the need for more quality of life improvements, and the government had proposed a number of family-friendly measures, including increasing paternity leave, maternity leave, and introducing parental leave as well. What do you think, first of all, on the introduction or rather the extension of such leave?
Yes, well, as a chamber, we have our own position, even on the proposal that the leave between parents can be exchanged between one another. If we really want to see more women at the place of work, the system should literally have the amount stipulated for the male and for the female. We also need to keep in mind that nowadays we also have same-sex families. So the bigger reality needs to be taken into consideration as well. As a business organization, we are not against systems which help to improve the quality of life. And in fact, from the meetings that we conduct with our businesses, a lot of businesses already offer even flexibility, etc., which suits the individual employee, even because you cannot have a one-size-fits-all. What works for me might not work for you. A flexible arrangement that makes me happy might not make you happy. So this is why, even when approaching this subject, it's important not to have a hard and fast rule, but to allow a degree of flexibility, to allow the employer to be able to operate, and also to allow agreement between employer and employee to see what would suit best, both best given the circumstances. However, on top of all this, we need to also keep taking into account our productivity levels. So statistics show that our productivity levels aren't increasing. And again, this is why at the start of the interview, I said that policy proposals cannot be seen in isolation. We need to see everything holistically, the impact of one over another. The positive impact is fine. The negative impact needs to be mitigated. So, and this is something which as a country we have not done yet. Unfortunately, even if you look at the way the electoral campaign was conducted, there were a lot of incentives being dished out every day, continuously, without any in-depth analysis of the downside or the repercussions of some of the proposals and how those can be mitigated.
If memory serves, one of the points that the Chamber was quite critical of was the Prime Minister's mentioning a discussion, wanting a discussion within the MCSD of regarding the workers' right for remote working or more flexible working, or.
But as it stands today, when you look at private enterprise, there are already a lot of businesses that offer flexibility, that offer the flexibility to work from home, that offer different working hours to their employees, etc. I tend to say that within the private sector, these work arrangements are even more flexible than within the public sector. But this is what I meant when I said allow flexibility. A one-size-fits-all will not fit for everyone. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin. So we have summer days around the corner. Now, as a chamber, we are not against the government employee enjoying his or her half days, but we are constantly pushing government to ensure that there is a fallback position. In the sense, private enterprise doesn't operate on half days. Some of the private enterprises literally work on a 24-hour basis, particularly when we're referring to logistics and anything to do with customs. So the state system needs to cater for that as well. Now, whereas we understand that public servants have their own summer days and wish to continue enjoying their summer days, that's fine. But it is government's role to ensure that the service is being given as well outside the normal half-day hours. So there can be the introduction of new shifts, etc. There are many ways of how it can be done. But the main point remains, you cannot introduce a new system, without seeing what its cons will be and how you will be addressing those cons to turn a negative into a positive.
You've touched upon the issue of traffic and transport already, but just prior to the electoral campaign, the government had come out with a proposal for a light rail system, and the first line that they proposed, though, did not include the economic hubs such as Sliema and St. Julian's in particular. Do you think this would be a successful project?
Well, both parties have provided their ideas of a mass transport system. The Nationalist Party provided a system, the Labour Party provided another system. The reality is that unless the number of cars on the road at any given time is reduced, no system will work. And this is what the Chamber is constantly pushing for. We need to have a system which literally has a number of ideas and solutions which will make it easier for the car user to use alternative modes of transport. In our lead document, as well as in all the public consultation documents published through Transport Malta and as well as other relevant ministries, we have always put forward a whole set of initiatives that need to be taken into consideration. So whilst on the one hand incentives do have their benefits, one must also think about disincentives. And for example, one of the proposals that we have advocated for is an e-mobility wallet. Where did this originate from? Basically, at that time when we first proposed it, government was subsidizing all public transport. So public transport is basically free of charge. But our reasoning was public transport does not meet everybody's needs and requirements, schedule, etc. So irrespective of how much you subsidize it, you are always going to leave a cohort of people outside of the picture because due to their work, where they work, etc., their requirements, they cannot use public transport. So what we were saying is that this subsidy, rather than directed only towards one type of transport, should be invested in the Maltese population, basically. Everybody should be given an amount which can be used on sustainable means of transport, which go beyond what we currently have in terms of public transport and sea transport.
The government has made a similar proposal in its manifesto, but one of the key differences is that the Chamber had also tied it to on-street parking.
Yes, we went one step further.
Do you think without disincentives, this would be a successful? Without that particular, without on-street parking, will this be a successful
I think
measure?
that ours would have been more successful, and I will explain why. So again, we need to move cars and we need to get cars off the road. The minute we get cars off the road, a trip will be shorter. And it will benefit both the individual user and businesses that are doing their deliveries, etc. So what we said, let's emulate what is happening in other countries. Basically, all of us go abroad, and in the more condensed areas, you have parking time zones. So what we were saying is, let's couple this e-mobility wallet together with parking fees for congested areas where if you enter with your own private car, you have to pay, but the amount that you pay gets credited back to you. So what
Into
you
your
have
e-mobility
paid
wallet.
comes back to you into your e-mobility wallet. So again, there we are differentiating between the citizen and the better citizen. If you decide, if you opt to continuously use your car, well, you have to pay. It's similar to the polluter pays principle. Who pollutes has to pay. On the other hand, if you are willing to change your style, your way of operating, your way of working, then you are getting the benefit of it. And that is what triggers a culture. So even if we were to look at the current use of taxi services, when they were first introduced within the island, there were a number of skeptics who said, who is going to catch a cab instead of using his or her own personal vehicle? Once it showed that it can be convenient, and in reality, it can also make sense for some businesses to have shared transport, then the service actually kicked off. So what we're advocating for here is we need to be bold enough to introduce incentives and disincentives and proposals which will help people move away from the way they have operated or acted so far to date.
The government presently, and even over the past years, has been quite adamant that against the use of disincentives for tackling the traffic problem. In your opinion, do you think Malta's traffic issue could be tackled without the introduction of any disincentives?
It depends how you see it. So if you look at our e-mobility smart meter proposal, some might see the smart meter as a disincentive. Some might see it as an incentive to the better citizen. So again, it depends on from which angle you look at it. But no proposal will work in isolation. For example, on traffic, we have put forward a number of proposals which are relatively easy to implement. First of all, let's remove the off-street parking fee penalty that is paid when there are certain developments being constructed where you can opt to pay the parking fee penalty instead of providing the adequate parking spaces too. Why, in today's day and age where technology is so vast ranging, why can't we literally tab our parking spaces so that you as a user, if you're going to, let's say, Slema, rather than having to go round and round and round trying to find a parking space, just as the maps take you to Slema through the shortest route, this tagging of the parking spots can actually take you to the first available parking spot. So there are small changes that can be done that would automatically help. But again, enforcement is crucial. For example, even when it comes to traffic, illegal parking, so parking around the corner, double parking, etc., all those, when looked at collectively, do have an impact on the ease of traffic flow.
Prior to the election, again, the government had come up with a plan for the Grand Harbour to regenerate the area, etc. When looking at what was presented,
Yes.
do you think it's the right way forward, or was it perhaps not enough catered for the operators who actually need to use the Grand Harbour?
So, as a chamber, we participate in all public consultations that government issues. It's taxing, but we do it even because we believe that it's one of the biggest service that we offer to our members in terms of we look into the public consultations in detail, communicate with our members, get their feedback, do our own research, and then put forward our position. Just to give you a number, usually more or less on average, year on year, we participate in over 100 public consultations, which is quite a lot. So that would equate roughly to one every 3 days if you consider a 7-day working week. On the Grand Harbour regeneration, whilst we understand that there needs to be the uplifting on the area, we also, and we emphasized a lot on it on our feedback, that we need to take into consideration the function of our main port. So our main port is what it is. And currently it is servicing a number of companies, including companies that are crucial for our imports, for our exports, for the servicing of maritime vessels, etc. And we believe that in the public consultation as put forward, due attention, there could have been better attention on how the other services would be hit. We have highlighted a number of concerns. We have also identified what other countries have done. We need to keep in mind one thing. A port is there to serve as a port. So we need to take care of our imports, exports, the logistical infrastructure that one needs to invest upon to allow for these imports and exports to be transferred from one place to another, the servicing of the maritime industry. And we hope that government will look into all the considerations that we have flagged within the public consultation and see how it will fit in both the upgrading of the area and still ensuring that these businesses are allowed to work in an efficient way.
The Chamber has also weighed in on the idea of electoral reform. Among other things, proposing a smaller number of MPs and even a smaller number of districts. Or realistically speaking, do you think this is something the political parties would eventually take on? And why do you think this is needed?
Okay, hope is always the last to die. When we published, we have a number of documents on how the electoral reform should take place, how Parliament should operate as well. We had presented them to both political parties, to the Speaker, Angelo Farrugia, who at that time was Speaker of the House. We would have liked to see more enthusiasm on both sides of the bigger parties. However, as I said, hope is the last to die. And the way we put forward our proposals, first of all, we did an analysis of what happens in other EU member states. And just to give an idea of the situation that Malta is in, Malta today has one member of parliament for every 4,500 voters, one member of parliament for every 6,000 inhabitants within the country. The country which is closest to us, which incidentally happens to be a relatively small country with more or less the same number of inhabitants as us, is Luxembourg. So whereas we have one MP for every 6,000 inhabitants, in Luxembourg it is one for every 11,000. So basically Luxembourg have a parliament which is nearly half the size of ours. And if you look at Luxembourg, it is a successful country as well. So one does question, why do we need to have this big parliament? On your question of districts, given the size of our country and given also the results we've seen in, for example, the MEP elections, there is no district. Malta votes one country, basically. If you look at the MEP elections, even when you look at them in terms of gender balance and whatnot, MEP elections reflect the results of an MEP election, in our opinion, are better than those of a national election. So what we are saying is currently we have 13 districts. Rather than going to one district immediately, let's downsize them to 5. And why 5? If you look at the way that, for example, the enforcement works in terms of LESA, that is also split in districts. So it is not a new concept for Malta of operating within 5 districts. And that is why we said, let's increase the geographical area covered by district and introduce the same concept that is introduced, for example, when it comes to certain levels of enforcement.
Has also made certain proposals regarding the 5% threshold, which would affect small parties as well.
In favor of third parties.
Exactly. Do you feel that such a threshold would be is a realistic goal which would see
Yes,
third
it
parties
would.
elected?
Yes, it would, particularly if it goes down from 13 districts to 5 districts. Yes. And
Fair enough.
ultimately, it's a fairer representation.
And have you had any positive or any feedback really from the two political parties on these proposals?
Well, as I said in the beginning, we wished that we had more engagement from both political parties, both from the Labour Party side and from the Nationalist Party side. However, hope is the last to die. Now there's a new legislature, a new cohort from the Nationalist Party, a new cohort from the Labour Party, and we will once again be advocating for these changes, even because in the reform that we have suggested, there are a number of ideas how parliamentarians can be helped. In reality, unless you are a minister, prime minister, or leader of opposition, you are left on your own in order, and you have to cater for the shadow or the responsibility that you have given. So the way we looked at it is, let's have a better functioning parliament, which is making better use of its resources, both the human resources and the financial element.
Dr. Portelli, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for your time and for your invitation.